It's your open source advocate, and I'm back with another video, and today I'm going to talk about Headscale. If you see my videos on NetMaker or Wireguard in general, then you'll know that Tailscale is an implementation of Wireguard that helps you set up a flat network across multiple local area networks, multiple devices. It's really awesome the way that it works. And of course I wanted to find an open source version of it because the Tailscale control server is not open source. Now their clients are, and we're going to use their clients for part of this setup. But Headscale is an open source implementation of that control server that works super well with all of the Tailscale stuff and helps you set this stuff up in a really great way. Now I'll say, compared to NetMaker, I find Headscale a little bit more difficult. Not super hard, but definitely there's a few more steps to get things set up the way you want, whereas NetMaker definitely has, like, you know, click this button, type this in, and you're done, and you've got an egress node into a network and things like that. You can do that with Headscale as well. It really works fine. I'm going to show you how that setup works, and we're going to get everything up and running today. So I'm going to go through Headscale, the server, the control UI, and if time isn't too far along, I might go ahead and cover some web GUIs that are there for the Headscale server, as well as the Tailscale side of things with a GUI that's created for Linux. There's already a GUI for macOS and Windows, of course, but they didn't create one for Linux for some reason, so somebody else did, which is awesome because it's open source and we love that. So we're going to get into the Headscale server setup right after this. I want to say thank you to all of my subscribers and all of my patrons over at Patreon. Seriously, you guys make this so worth it for me to do these videos every week. I really truly enjoy it, and I just can't say thank you enough. If you're enjoying these videos, subscribe. Let YouTube know that I'm doing a good job by subscribing to the channel. Plus, you'll get notified when I have new videos coming out. And finally, if you're enjoying what I'm doing, give it a like. Just click on that thumbs up, and that way YouTube knows that you like it, and they'll pass it along to other people that might enjoy my content as well. I really appreciate it. Thank you again. Let's get started. So to set up the Headscale server, we're going to go over to our terminal, and we're going to log into our test system. And as always, we're going to create our folder structure first. So we're going to do mkdir-p docker/headscale. So when we do that, this command says, make a directory and check to see if the Docker directory exists. If it does, just use it. If it doesn't, then create it. Then it goes to the next step and says, now see if there's a Headscale directory inside of that, and if there is, use it, otherwise create it. So we get a lot out of that single command. So we're going to cd into that new folder. If we do an ls, there's nothing there yet, so we need to create a couple of things. We need to create some folders inside of this. So we're going to do an mkdir config and an mkdir data to create a config folder and a data folder. And then we're also going to create a docker-compose.yaml file. So we're going to do a nano docker-compose.yml. Now what we want in this is pretty straightforward. It's pretty small. It makes it really easy to get the server up and running actually, but we do need a configuration file to go with it, so don't go off and run things ahead of me here. I'm going to copy what I've got and I'm going to paste it into here. So this is a version 3.5 Docker Compose file. Our service is going to be called Headscale. Our image is Headscale, and it's the latest version is what it's going to pull. Now it's going to pull stable. It doesn't pull alphas and things like that, so you'll see some things about that here in a minute. The volumes we wanted. We already have our config and our data, and I've got those set as // which means in the same directory where this Docker Compose file exists, and we're going to map those to etc Headscale and var lib Headscale inside the container. So the things on the left are our host volumes, folders on our host. The things on the right are our Docker container folders. So we're mapping this folder from the host to this folder in the Docker container in both of these situations. For the ports, normally they set this to 8080 and they map it to 8080. I changed it because 8080 is a very common port. You can change this port on the left side to anything you want as long as it's not a common port for some other service, and as long as it's not currently in use on your host. So I set up 27896 because it's a pretty simple number for me to remember, and it's not a common port. So this command, Headscale serve, is how you bring up the server. So once it actually pulls all the stuff down, gets everything going, it's going to run this command that says Headscale serve, which says bring up the Headscale server for me. And finally, we've got this part that says restart unless stopped. which means if I reboot my server, my physical server, my virtual server, any of those things, it'll restart this container once it comes back up. Unless I stop this container intentionally and then do anything, it's going to try to restart the container. So I really like this setting because it lets me stop it if I want to, but other than that, it'll restart on its own. So we're going to save that with Control O. We're going to hit Enter and then Control X to exit. And now we need to go grab a configuration file, and they've got a nice example configuration file out there on their GitHub site. So we're going to use a command to go grab that and pull it down. And this is that command, so it's going to use curl. So you want to make sure you have curl installed on your server there. And then it's going to go out to their GitHub site here, and it's going to pull down their config example.yaml file. And this -o just says when it comes down, put it in the config folder and name it config.yaml. So that's what we're going to have. I'm just going to hit enter for that, and it's done. And now we need to go into that configuration file and actually change a couple of things. Not much, but there's a little bit of stuff to be aware of in there. So we're going to do nano config and then config.yaml. And you'll see here we've got a whole lot of information that they're giving us, but we're going to be fine. We're just going to run through this really quick. So right here, the URL clients will connect to. So I want to have this where my clients can actually get to it over the internet. So I'm going to give it a fully qualified domain name like their example up here. What they have is your clients are going to try to connect over this 127.0.0.1. So I'm just going to go here and take this out. And I want it to be an HTTPS service, but I'm going to leave it as HTTP for now. So I'm going to call this headscale.routemehome.org. So I own the domain routemehome.org. I am creating a subdomain called Headscale in that domain, and I have an A record already set up to point to my public IP address. When that gets to my network, it's going to hit the firewall, and it's going to be on port 80 or port 443. That's going to forward through to a reverse proxy that I run called Nginx Proxy Manager, which I'll show you in a minute. And I'm going to set up an entry in there with this same exact FQDN right here, headscale.routemehome.org. And I'm going to tell it to point to this server inside of my network on the 27896 port. And that's what's going to let things work properly. Now, there's no website that goes with the Headscale server here on its own. There are some other ones that will add to it, but nothing just built in. Everything is command line. Okay, so we'll go through that as well. So on the listen address, you can just leave that as 127.0.0.1, and then as we need to change that. I'm wrong. We don't want to leave that. We want to change that. So we're going to mark that one out with the pound sign here, and we're going to go right above it and just take out the pound sign in front of the listen address that says 0000 and 8080, which is fine. This is talking about inside the container, but we want to make sure that any other source can actually reach this service. As we go down, so this metrics part, I just left everything else exactly as it is. I don't think I changed anything else, but we'll kind of scroll down through here and talk about any of the things that are really important. All these things you just want to leave like they are. This one here on the IP address. So this is the IP address range that it will use to assign out IP addresses to devices that get onto your network. If you don't understand what these are, I would highly recommend not changing them. If you do, and you know you want a different IP range and a different subnet mask size, then feel free to do that. But you should absolutely know what these things mean before you change them. So most private IP addresses are 192.168.x.x, which means that's going to be a 192.168/ I believe it's 16 here. You can do 10.0.0.0 or 10.x.x.x/8. which means any of these last three octets can be variable when you have the 10 address. And again, you can look up the private address ranges and it'll tell you exactly what they are. If you don't have a reason to change this, I wouldn't. Just leave it as it is. Just know that you can, but when you do add clients to the Headscale network, it's going to give you a little message about, hey, that's not within the Headscale stuff. It's just going to warn you about it. I would say, again, it does exactly what you want. It gives you an IP in the range that you set, but it does give you a warning in the command line that's kind of annoying. So I'd say if you don't have to change it, don't change it. Alright, as we continue down, we've got these derp settings. I didn't change any of this stuff. I just left it as it is. We're just going to continue down all the way past this. And there's quite a bit here. A lot of it's comments to help you understand what these things are. So just understand that anything with a hashtag in front of it or the pound sign here, that's a comment so that you can read it and understand more about what this thing is setting. So disable check updates. So basically, if you want to check for automatically check for updates, you'd set this to true. If you want to enable it, leave it as false. That's kind of how it works. Ephemeral node inactivity timeout 30 minutes seems fine. Node update check interval 10 seconds also seems fine, but you could change that if you really want to. I don't suggest getting it any less than that. It shouldn't need it. The DB type, in this case, it is going to use SQLite 3, which is fine. If you're only going to set up maybe 50, 100, even 500 clients, SQLite will probably handle that with no problem. I would not worry too much about it. If you're going to be setting up thousands to 10,000s of clients, you might want to go and set up a Postgres database. Again, highly recommended if you're setting up that many clients that you know what you're doing. You should know how to go set up your Postgres database and how to put the values in here so that this knows how to connect to it and use it. But in our case, I think DB type SQLite 3 is going to be just fine, and this is the DB path var lib headscale DB SQLite, which, if you remember, in our docker compose.yaml file, we mapped to a volume on the host, which means that's going to be persisted between updates, which is great. We're going to continue down. So the let's encrypt stuff, I'm going to set that through my reverse proxy, so there's nothing for me to set here, so I didn't change any of these things. It's up to you guys if you want to, but again, if you're using a different reverse proxy, there's nothing to do here. So just keep moving down. Logs, if you want to do something with your logs, you can, and you can change this to whatever format you want and the level. You could change this to debug to get more information, but you should only do that if you're asked to do that by the developers for some reason. Otherwise, leave it like it is. As we keep going down, you can set up ACLs. So there's an ACL policy path if you have a policy file that you want to use. Again, not something I'm going to go through here. It's way outside the scope of just learning how to set this up and get a few clients connected. But if you want to learn those things, there's documentation out there that tells you all about it. Your name servers. If you don't like the 1.1.1.1 name servers of Cloudflare, then you could change that to 8.8.8.8 for Google, or I can't remember the other one, 207, I don't remember anyways. It's the ones for OpenDNS, or you can use any DNS servers you want, name servers that you want. Actually, it's up to you, but this is fine for me for what we're doing. So as we continue down, you can set up DNS information continually down this whole section here. So this is all DNS information under that DNS setting that's right up there at the top. So they do have a thing called Magic DNS, and it's pretty interesting, and it kind of starts up here. But if you want to run this in a way that lets you name your different machines and just call them by name, if you set up the right host entry and you have this turned on and ready, and you set up a special file like you're seeing here, then you can basically go and say, hey, I want grafana whatever you call your vpn.example.com to point to 100.64.0.3. That's going to be my Grafana machine. Same way with any other machine you want. If you wanted Prometheus to be 100.64.0.4, you could set that up, and then you could call these things by name instead of having to do it by IP address. For me, I generally know what my IP addresses are for my different servers, and I'm going to show you some tools that are going to help you figure out which things you want to connect to that are really great. There's some great GUI tools that are open source out there that give you a web server GUI on top of the server, as well as a nice open source project that gives you a GUI server in your Linux environments when you're running with a normal desktop. So pretty nice. Otherwise, you can do a lot of things with the command line as well, so we'll kind of go through all that. All right, we're going to keep going down here. Base domain. So if you're going to use the magic DNS that we talked about up above, you would want to set whatever the base domain is going to be. So in this case, our base domain would be headscale.routemehome.org. And then I could set up, prometheus.headscale.routemehome.org, grafana.headscale.routemehome.org, and so on. So just know that if you want us to use those things, you need to set up that base domain down here, and you need to know what that base domain is going to be in order to set it, of course. As we keep going down, you have some OIDC stuff. I'm going to cover this later because I'm going to do a video on Authentic, and I'm going to set up an OAuth authentication setup. And OIDC is one of those things that you'll really like, and I think you'll really appreciate how it makes this work even more fluidly and just so much easier in my opinion. But for now, we're going to learn the concepts of everything, and we'll get this going. There's nothing else in here to change, so we're going to do Control-O to save our changes, Control-X to exit that file. And we are now ready to actually go and pull everything down and get it started and up and running. So as always, we're going to do docker space compose up dash D, and then 2 ampersands, and we're going to put a second command. So that first command is docker compose up dash D that says bring down the images, start the containers, and run them as a daemon in the background so that I don't have to stay connected, but they'll stay running. The next one is docker compose and then logs dash F. So this says once you get that up and running, show me the logs and follow them so that I can see what's going on as it happens. Now I've already done this in testing, so I've pulled the images down, so you won't see that part here, but if you're doing it for the first time, you'll see the images getting pulled down, so be patient. Just takes 30 seconds, maybe a minute, or it should be less than a minute depending on your internet speed. So I'm going to hit this, you're going to see it's going to create it, it's going to get started, and that's it. It's up and running. It tells us right here on 00008080 that's inside the container. So both of these things are listening inside the container, but we're running. I don't have any devices connected to it yet, so I want to talk a little bit about actually using the command line information. Because this is running in Docker, you can run this from here, but you just need to tell it to run the commands inside the Docker container. And there's 2 different ways you can do that. You can use docker compose exec, and then you use the service name, which is Headscale. So this just says, hey, I'm about to tell you to run some commands, and I want you to execute them inside of the service with the name Headscale. Then you put in the command, which is Headscale, and we can type in nodes and then list. And that would list all the nodes we have. Of course, we don't have any, so we don't see anything listed there except for just the kind of the header bar, title bar, whatever you want to call it. The other way we can do this is just with plain Docker. We can say Docker, and then we can, now in this case, we're going to say exec, but we want to use the actual container name. So we're going to hit just tab right there, and you see it says Headscale-Headscale-1. That's the one we want. And then we're going to do the same thing. Headscale, this is the command, nodes, and then list. And we're going to get the same output that we just got. It's just running it in a different way. Now, this is the other thing I was talking about on those automatic updates and which version it's using. So it's telling you, hey, an update version of Headscale has been found. But it's an alpha 1. So it's telling me it's 0.23.0 alpha 1, which means it's very early. Alpha means like this thing may not be stable. It may have some broken parts. But it's telling us that we're running 0.22.3. So I want to run the stable version. I don't want to run an alpha version, but be aware if you want to run the alpha version, you can go out there and figure out what tag you need for that. I prefer the stable version, and that's what it pulls automatically. Okay, I'm coming back to this after the fact, and I apologize. I thought I had recorded the part where I was setting up the proxy, the actual reverse proxy, but in order to do that so that we can actually have our clients reach the server, and once we get ready, we're also going to want to add a little bit to this later in the video. We'll do that so that you can actually get to your web GUI if you want to use that as well. But first we just need the clients to be able to reach our server, and we want to do that by host name so that we can do that across the internet, which is the whole point of a VPN. So here we're going to click into our proxies, we're going to click add, and we're going to click right here, and we're just going to type in the name that we want. So in this case it's headscale.routemehome.org. And then we're just going to hit tab so that it turns into a little chip like that. And once we've got that, remember I've got the domain name, I own routemehome.org. I have a subdomain of Headscale, and I have an A record on that domain that points to my public IP address. When the request comes to my firewall looks at it and says, oh, okay, I know what that is. I'm going to pass that through on port 80 or 443 to Nginx Proxy Manager. Nginx Proxy Manager looks at whatever site you're requesting and says, do I have this in my list of sites? And if it does, it'll send you along to the IP address wherever you're running that particular service. And then you want to put in the port that you also mapped for that service. So we're going to put in the IP address, 192.168.10.60 in my case. And the IP address was 27896. We're going to say block common exploits and WebSocket support, and make sure it's publicly accessible. So this says, if I get this request, I'm going to send it to this server on this port. That's pretty simple. Now we want to get an SSL certificate so that everything is being encrypted with HTTPS. So we're going to click on the SSL tab, click on the little none drop down. We're going to click on request a new certificate, force SSL, HTTP2 support, and then make sure your email is filled in, and then click on the I agree to the Let's Encrypt terms of service. And then finally, you'll just click on Save. Now, if you have everything set up correctly with your A records, your port forwarding, everything like that, what this is going to do is going to say, hey, let's encrypt. I have this site that I want you to try to give me a certificate for. And it's going to go, okay, what site? And it's going to hand off this name, and Let's Encrypt's going to say, okay, let me see if I can hit that name on port 80, which is why we're forwarding this port right here. It's going to come in and it's going to go, okay, yes, I got through the firewall, yes, okay, I see your site. And when it does that, it's going to go, all right, let me issue a nice certificate here. It's going to issue that certificate, and then this little box is just going to go away. And it's going to take less time than it took me to explain what's going to happen for that to happen in most cases. But when you click save, you'll see a little spinner. Once you get a certificate, the box just closes, and you'll see an entry down in your list, and it'll have a Let's Encrypt certificate over here, and you're set. So that's really how you set up your reverse proxy. There's not a lot more to it. If you're using a different piece of software than Nginx Proximity for your reverse proxy, you're going to have to understand how to set that up. I just don't know enough about the other software to do that for you. So we've got our Headscale server up and running, and the next thing we want to do is add clients. Before we add any actual devices to our network, we need to create at least one user. So we want to do that, and you can do that with the command line very easily. Now I will again show you a way to do this with an OAuth type authenticated user later, and it makes it easier to add your devices. I mean, it's not hard to do it this way either, but just a different way of doing things. But we can just add users here through the command line, and understanding why the command line works like this is knowing that we're running this in Docker. So we're going to write in a command that says docker and then exec, which means execute this inside of the Docker container that I'm about to name. In this case, the Docker container is called Headscale, Headscale 1, so that's why I just started typing head and then hit tab so it would autocomplete it. So this part of the command says, run what I'm about to give you inside of this container. Now I'm going to write the actual command that I want it to run, which is Headscale, so that's the start of the command. And I'm going to say users create, and then I'm going to give it the name of the user I want it to create. So in this case, my name, Brian. And there we go. So it created my user. You can see that right here. Now I know there's a lot of stuff here. So first it says there's an updated version of Headscale. We kind of talked about this. It's an alpha 1, but I want to use this current stable one. It's going to tell you that every time you do this just because it's trying to let you know, hey, there's an updated version. So now we've got a user. We want to actually go and add some clients. And what we need to do in order to add those clients is get a pre-auth key. So we're going to do the same thing we just did. We're going to do that docker exec Headscale, Headscale 1, and then we're going to say Headscale. And we're going to create a pre-auth key. So we're going to say pre-auth keys create, and then we're going to say -e, and we're going to give it a time for it to expire. So I'm going to say 24 hours -u, and what user do we want this to be created for, and what user is this machine going to be assigned to? So we only have one user, so we'll put in my username. If you had multiple users, of course, you could choose who it's going to be assigned to. So we're going to hit enter, and it's going to create this key right here for us. So I need this key, and I actually need to set up a machine where I can go and actually get my node going. So I'm going to add this to one of my Docker servers here. So I'll log into that. I'm going to increase the font size for you. And I'm going to go and get this Tailscale app. So it's really easy to get. We're going to go over to Tailscale, and they have this download Tailscale page. And right here I've got Linux selected, but they have Mac OS, iOS, Windows, Linux, and Android. So just pick the one you need and then follow their instructions. But for Linux, we've got this nice one-liner command that works pretty well. So I'm going to copy it, and I'm going to go back, and I'm going to just paste that in. I'm going to let that run. And you need curl because it's going to go to this address with curl, and it's going to pull down a file called install.sh, and then it's going to run it, which is what that pipe sh means. This essentially just says, hey, go update everything and make sure it's got updated packages, and then it's going to say, now let's install Tailscale. So this works really well, at least on Ubuntu. That's where I've tried it. Debian, it also worked well on Debian, so I've tried it there. Those are both Debian-based systems anyways, but should work on most of the systems that you can run with Linux. So I've got a new kernel module. I'll just say OK. It's in the middle of a command, so I think it continues in the background even though I've said OK. It's kind of weird. I don't know why it does this, but it kind of locks up when I do this. Let me see if I can just close out of it and then go back into it here. I just set Tailscale, and it gives me all of the commands that I can run with the Tailscale command. Of course, you actually need to do that as sudo, so I would do sudo Tailscale. So I'm just going to paste the rest of the command in there, and it's sudo Tailscale up, which means bring up my Tailscale client. use the login server that I've got listed here. In this case, that's not the right login server, so we're going to fix it here. Headscale.routemehome.org, and then -- key. And we're going to put a space, and we're going to grab our auth key from our server here. So here it is right here. We're just going to highlight it again, and then we'll right click and copy it. And then we'll go back to the other tab here and right click and paste. And this is just going to tell it, hey, go ahead and add this machine to the system. Again, it's going to ask me for my super user password because I logged out and back in, and it finishes with no errors or anything like that. So we can do sudo tailscale status, and you'll see right here it shows that we've got the we've got my UB Docker server. That's the name of my device. Here's the information for it. Here's my username, and then it's a Linux system. So pretty basic information there. But if we go back to our server, we can actually use the headscale command again to see a little bit more information. I showed you this earlier. So we can say nodes and list. So there we go. We've got our UB Docker server is up and it's running, and you can see here that it's got an mbgpc. Brian is the username, and it's 100.64.0.1. So let's add one more and just show you that we can actually ping each other with these IP addresses, which means they're communicating over Wireguard like we want. So we'll go and add one more server here. So I'm going to log into my Docker server 2. And again, I'll just increase the font size here. And I'm going to run that same command that I did. All right, so we've got Tailscale installed. So I'm going to do sudo tailscale up, and then -- login-server, and then https://headscale.routemehome.org -- auth key, and then I'm going to go grab a new auth key from my server. So I'm going to run that same command I did a while ago, and we want to create a pre-auth key for my user, and it's going to give me a new key. So I'm going to grab that key, copy it, and I'm going to go back here, and I'm just going to paste that key in, and there we go. So now if I do sudo tailscale status, you can see the status there, and you can see that I can see both of my systems on the list. Now I can sudo tailscale IP, I think, yeah. So it shows me the IP address of this machine, and if I switch here and do that sudo tailscale IP, I can see that this one's got that IP. So if I do ping and I put in the other IP, which is .2, that's 100.64.0.2, you can see it starts pinging, which is great. So I'm hitting the other machine from my server. Both of my machines are on this Tailscale network, and I'm able to ping and reach those machines. So we've got machines set up, we've got our user created, and everything is up and running. So I've shown you all the basics. Set up your server, get it running. Set up a reverse proxy, get it going. Add a user to your server, and then add some machines for that user onto your Wireguard network that's being run by Headscale and using the open source Tailscale clients. So we're up and running, we've got everything going, you're adding servers, you've added nodes, and now you can go and actually do some really cool stuff. The next thing we want to do is look at a couple of GUIs. One is going to be the web server GUI that sits on top of your Headscale server, and the other one's going to be a GUI that works on your Linux or desktops, because there's really not anyone made by Tailscale, but there's somebody who went and made one of their own, and it works really nicely, so I'll show you how to install that as well. There are several user interfaces that people have built using web technologies to sit on top of your Headscale server. This is the one that I chose just because it seemed to be the most full-featured, but there are others out there, and the Headscale site lists a couple of more for you to go look at if you want to. I kind of like this. It makes it pretty easy to see what's going on. They give you some great screenshots here, and you've got some control from the actual interface, which is pretty nice as well for a few of the things that we were doing through the command line. So I'll kind of go through that also. This tells you what the tech is, things like that. I did go and ask them to give me any links if they have it for how to support the project, because there's nothing listed here on their page right now. I couldn't find anything, so if you find something, let me know. But I do always like projects to list out, hey, you know, what kind of things can we do to support the project, you know, and help you out. So I'll be looking for that. But they have a setup page here that gives you some installation and setup information. They have bare metal. Docker Compose is what we want to use in our case because we're already using Compose for that main Headscale server. So it gives you a list of the different items that you can have here, which is pretty great. So it gives you a really great way to kind of get this set up and let you see like what kind of settings, environmental variables you have, and explains what those are for and what they can be used for. So we're going to jump over and just look at what this looks like when you put it together. And what you do is you take the Compose that they have and you just add a new services section to your Headscale Docker Compose file, and then make sure a couple of things are set up properly for it to be able to communicate with your main Headscale server. You don't have to run it that way, but to me it makes it very easy to run it that way. Alright, back on our Headscale server and inside of our Docker Headscale folder, we want to create a new volume or a new folder. So we're going to do mkdir, and then we're going to call this volume. I think volume, maybe it's volume, so let me check and make sure. It is volume, so we're just going to create this just like this. And then we're going to change the permissions on this thing to make sure that we are the owners. We're going to do just chown 1000:1000, and then volume, just like that, just to make sure it's ours. And now we're going to go and edit our Docker Compose file. So we're going to use nano docker-compose.yaml. And we're going to just move down right here where we've got the services section. We're just going to move down, and we're going to move one more line, 1, 2, and then we're just going to paste this in because I've got it all copied already to the clipboard, and we'll go up and kind of look at what it really says to us. So we've got our Headscale section that we already set. Down below this, we've got the Headscale Web UI section that we just added. So this is going to be pulling from the Headscale Web UI latest, and it's going to be called Headscale Web UI. So right here on the time zone, you can change this to your time zone. I've got America, Chicago, because that's where I'm at. Here we labeled it PGID, PUID 1000, 1000. And then we've got the color is blue. You can set this to any primary color. This is based on what Materialize CSS uses for its color scheming. You can't use like blue darkened 2 or anything like that, but you can use blue, red, blue, gray, things like that for the color scheming. It's very much up to you kind of which one you choose, but I just left it as blue. That's what they had defaulted. Now here, the Headscale server, we want to set this to our Headscale server domain. So in our case, it's headscale.routemehome.org, and the same thing here. So we're just going to set this twice, which is /admin. So this just says whenever you go to this address, after this is going to say /admin if you want to get to the user interface side of it. We've got this key here, so this is just a placeholder key. It's not an actual key, so we need to go create this key. We're going to just erase this, and we'll go create one. And there's comments in here that tell you all about kind of how to do this. So they say use OpenSSL random base6432 as the command. So as long as you have OpenSSL installed, this will work. So we're just going to copy that, and we're going to do a Control-O real quick and save our changes. We'll exit out, and we'll just paste that in. And it's going to give us this key right here, and it's fine that you see it because I'm going to get rid of this test server afterwards. So we've got this nice key that we need, and I'm just going to copy that. I'm going to go back into my docker compose.yaml file and go right back down to where we were, and we're going to go here and just paste in this key just like that. So we've got our key pasted in, and then we've got this auth type. So here you can see that it's set to OIDC. If you don't have an OpenID Connect type thing set up like Authentic, Authelia, Keycloak, something like that, and you're not familiar with how to set that up for now, you don't have to use this. You can actually use this with basic authentication instead, and that's probably what you want to do. So what we're going to do is we're going to change this to say basic, and then log level is info, that's fine. We want to set our environment variables for our basic authentication, so I'm just going to set this to equals Brian. And then down here, I'm going to set this to a password. And this, you should always use a long, strong password for this, but I'll just use something simple because, again, I'm going to destroy this afterwards. Something like that. And then we need to uncomment these 2 lines. Just like that. Now down here for the OIDC stuff, we're not going to use it right now, so we're going to comment those lines out. And then we've got our port mapping. So we've got 5000 to 5000. That's fine unless you have 5000 already in use. You should change it to something else. We did 27896, so I think 5000 is fine. You just need to remember whatever you set this to. If you have 5000 already in use, you don't want to use it. So we could use 51. In fact, let's just use like 9290. That shouldn't be in use. And that's on my left side is what's on the host system, and this is inside the container. So we leave the right side alone. For our volumes, you can see we've got /volume and /config, which is already set, and it's a read-only volume. We should have everything set that we need, so we're going to save with Control-O and exit nano with Control-X, and we're just going to do a docker compose up-d again, and then 2 ampersands docker compose logs-f. So it's going to bring down the new stuff for the Headscale Web UI. It's going to get it started. It's going to start showing us some output from the logs. So we need to look and see update and is okay. So everything there looks okay, I think. The poll net map machine, maybe Docker server 2, noise true, log level set at info. So it's giving us some basic information here. I think everything looks okay. So it says configuring the app. We'll give it just a minute. While we're doing that, we need to go set up a new entry on our Nginx proxy manager for our reverse proxy that we created. So we're going to go in here. We're going to go to our Headscale entry right here, and we're going to hit. We're going to click on this 3 dots and click Edit, and I'm going to zoom this up for you guys. So you see it's already got headscale.routmehome.org in there. What we need to do is add a custom location right here on this tab. So we're going to hit Add Locations, and we're going to hit /admin is what we had inside of the Docker Compose file. We're going to put in the same address, and we're going to put in port 9190, I believe is what we set. And then let me just double check my IP address. 60, not 64. I keep making that mistake, and it's just not good. So we want to make this the right IP address. There we go. We're going to hit save. And now if we actually go to that IP, alright, there we go. So it comes up. Now, the first thing that it wants is it wants this server information, so you need to get this API key. Well, luckily they've got these instructions. So I'm going to blow this up a little bit for you. I'm going to click on the instructions. They give you this nice pop-up, and they tell you you need to go and ask for this API key, which is the command Headscale API keys create. So we've already done this a few times. Pretty easy to get going. I'll clear this out, and we're going to do docker exec. Remember, we're running this inside of the container. Headscale 1, and then Headscale, and it's going to give us this nice API key that we need in order for our UI to be able to connect. So we're going to copy that, and we're going to go back to the browser here. We can close this, and we're going to erase this and paste in the new one, and we're going to hit save, and it's going to go out and check and see, hey, can I see it? Yes, I can. Here's all the information that I needed. It's going to give you an expiration date, everything like that about the key. We're going to hit close, and then we're going to hit test, and it's going to show us to you again. So it runs it, and it says success, which is great, which means we're now connected. So we can scroll down, we can see a little bit of information about this, and we can jump over here to our user. And it starts off a little bit slow, but it does get faster after you've done it a few times and it's cached a bit of information. So it grabs the information from your user, and you can see here that I've got a couple of keys that I've created, of course, and we can see here whether they're used, ephemeral, whether they're usable. We have actions. If there's any actions available, it gives you those as well. You can delete the user here, and you can even rename the user here. So pretty useful from this tool. And then if we go over here, we'll see our actual machines. So there's my first server, and again, we can delete the server. We can move the server to a different user. We can rename the server if we don't like that name. And then down here we can see a bunch of the information. So we can see the IP addresses that it gave. We can see when it was last seen, last updated, created, so on and so forth. And we can even give tags to these machines. So we've got both of these servers here where we can see this information and take these actions. And you can add other machines right here as well. But what you want to have is the ability to log in to your server. So you want to say select the user, and then we want to have a machine registration key that we're actually going to use in order to register that machine. So it's something that you need to have by running this information and basically going and getting the registration key from the machine. The other one is the pre-auth keys, which it tells you, hey, you can do this, but you need to do it from the users tab. So we can actually add machines here from the users tab. And remember how we had to create that pre-auth key from the Headscale server? Instead, we can say add a pre-auth key right here. It's going to come up, it's going to give us a little bit of information. It's going to ask us if we want to put in an expiration date, whether it should be reusable or ephemeral, and then we can click on add and get a new key, and it'll give you a key that you just, again, take, copy it, and then paste it into your Tailscale device to add that device to your system. So a good bit of information that you can get here, a good bit of information that you can see. So if you want to toggle expired things, you don't see them anymore, pretty easy. It just lets you kind of clear up the list a little bit. So yeah, I mean, a really nice little user interface, gives you a lot of really decent control over your Headscale server that you don't have to go into the command line if you don't want to, but you can still do some things in the command line if you want to as well. And there are settings over here as well. There's not a lot here for the settings. It's really just setting the API key and seeing the about information. But we do have an overview tab as well. So if we jump over to the overview tab here, again, it grabs this information and starts caching it, so it gets a little bit faster over time. So machines added, users added. So you can kind of see all the information that we've got going. And then you've got some general information about the actual system, and then you've got some DNS information as well. So pretty useful. Pretty nice little web UI that I like quite a bit. And again, it's got the basic auth if you don't already have an OIDC provider, but I'm going to do a video on Authentic and we'll get OIDC set up and we can use it for both the server and for the web UI here, which is pretty nice. Now, if you're like me, using the command line is fine, having things connected all the time is fine, but having a little bit more control over your different devices is also very useful. So I like to have a user interface when I'm on a desktop. It's just nice to have that. It's very convenient, and a lot of times it makes things a little bit easier than open up the terminal, typing in a command. You can just flip a switch, something like that. Unfortunately, Tailscale does not make a user interface for Linux. They do make it for Windows and Mac, so if you've got that kind of machine, you're set. But if you have a Linux machine like I do and you're looking for something, there's a really nice open source program out here called Trayscale, which gives you almost all of the same capabilities as the Tailscale client, which is really nice. It's just a wrapper around the command line tools, but it's really, really cool. So here you can see that he's got some information. He's got an about. He's got his releases listed. He's got the packages that he used, the contributors and languages. And then if you continue down, he's got a place down here where you can actually go and contribute a little bit of money to him. I'm looking for it. There it is right here. So you can buy him a coffee, which is really awesome. Definitely, if you like this and you're going to use this, get out there and donate so that he'll be encouraged to continue developing this piece of software, because I think it's a pretty nice piece of software actually. So you have AUR instructions, you have manual install instructions, and you have FlatHub, which is something that I really like. So if we click on FlatHub, it should take us right to the page. And if we just click on the little down arrow, we'll get our install command right here. We can open up our terminal and then just go to a tab that's on our actual local machine here. So now I can paste in that command from FlatHub, and you can see it's just going to grab Trayscale for us. So it's going to go and load up the metadata. It's going to ask, are you sure you want to do this? Yes, I do. And then we're going to give it just a minute to get installed. Now, one thing to note is I'm running KDE, but this is actually going to use a GNOME look, and it uses, I'm going to say GNOME, but it uses GNOME or GNOME, however you want to say it. So it uses the GNOME platform, so it's going to have that GNOME look, but it sets everything up inside of its container for the Flatpak, so everything you need will be there whenever you're ready for it. Alright, so Trayscale finished installing, so we can just click on the icon here and start typing, and there's Trayscale. It's going to come up and it's going to give us a warning. So we're going to give it just a second to start, and it's going to say, hey, this user is not set as an operator. You should have run this command first. So it's sudo tailscale set --options equals $user, or --operator equals $user. So we're going to go back and do that. We're just going to close this. We'll close it from the tray over here. So it's called Trayscale. It runs in the tray mostly. We're going to do sudo tailscale set --operator equals $user. Now, this little variable here just means it's the user that you're currently logged in as. So this is all this is telling it. So it's going to set that user as the operator, and it should come back just like that. And now if we go and set up Trayscale, should open up and not give us that warning. There we go, and you can see that shows the name of my current machine that I'm on, and I've got some other really cool stuff. Now I can't change the size of the interface, but it does adapt. I have the dark theme set, so it already adapted the colors to that. Shows you what my IP address is on the network that this machine is a part of. And as we go down, I've got different options. So this one that says accept routes. What I did was I set up one of my other machines as a router that allows me to access a separate local area network at a whole separate location through this route. So there's commands that I ran to actually get all this done, but this just picked up on it that this is already set, so it turned on that flag for me. I didn't have to go turn it on. The nice thing about having Trayscale is if you don't want to learn those commands and figure all that out, which I'll cover that in the show notes, but I'm not going to go through it here. If you install Trayscale, you can just check this box and it'll help you with those things. I'll talk about setting up subnet routes and stuff like that in the show notes. It's a little bit deep for this one, but it's a useful tool as well. If you'd like a separate video, let me know in the comments and I would be happy to do one, but we're going to move forward. Here you can see the other machines that are on my network, and you can see some details about them, which is really nice. And yeah, you can see if they're connected currently. So you can kind of click through, see this information, and then if you want to disconnect this machine from the network, you can tick this box right here to disconnect it from the network, and then tick it again to reconnect it to the network. So you have some pretty decent control over those kind of things. And again, you can copy your IP address. You've got some different stuff that you can set, which is pretty great. So I like this tool. It's really nice. It's a really nice little user interface. And when you close it, it just actually minimizes to the tray down here at the bottom right. And you can just bring it back up by clicking on show, and it'll load back up and make sure everything's the same. It reloads that information when you do that, which is nice. But it's there running if you need it, and really, really simple, really straightforward. So I really like that. I think it's a really great tool. I've tried to show you several things in here that'll help you get Headscale up and running, help you get your machines added to your Tailscale network, and help you have some nice GUI tools on top of that to use with your Wireguard network. Hope you enjoyed this. If you did, like, subscribe, tell your friends about it so they can come along the journey with us, and I'll talk to you next time. It's your open source advocate, and I'm back, and I've set up a store with a little bit of merchandise. I love being your open source advocate, but I want you guys to be the open source advocates with me. So if you want to, get out there and get some of this stuff. And if you do, let me know what you think of it. Thank you for subscribing.